The psychoanalytic approach to personality teaches us that all people, even the most well-adjusted, undergo inner struggles. According to this approach, people are born with certain biological drives like aggression, sex, and the need for superiority. But these drives may come with conflicts with laws, social norms, and moral codes that have previously been internalized. Sigmund Freud focused on the inner conflict, meaning that he believed that the conscious ideas and feelings occupy only a small part of our mind, and many people's deepest thoughts, fears, and urges remain outside of our awareness. And these urges are pushed into the unconscious part of the mind. And one way that he actually explored this was called psychoanalysis. And this was when people were encouraged to talk about anything that pops into their minds, and they do so in a comfortable and relaxed setting. He also explored the unconscious through dream analysis, and he believed that people experience unconscious wishes in their dreams, often disguised in disguised form. And Freud would ask people to record their dreams, and then he would try to help them explore their meaning. And he also used hypnosis, which he eventually abandoned. So, Freud believed that the mind has three basic psychological structures: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id represents basic drives like hunger. It demands pleasure through instant gratification and pays no attention to laws, social customs, or the needs of others. It follows what Freud called the pleasure principle, which is the urge for immediate release of energy or emotion that will bring personal gratification, relief, or pleasure. According to Freud, this is present at birth, but the ego develops because a child's demands for instant gratification cannot be met, or because meeting these may be harmful. So the ego stands for reason and good sense and is guided by the reality principle, which is the understanding that in the real world we cannot always get what we want. The ego seeks to satisfy the appetites of the id in ways that are consistent with reality. And although most of the ego is conscious, some of its business is carried out unconsciously. The third psychological structure is the superego, and this develops throughout early childhood, and it functions according to the moral principle. By incorporating the standards and values of parents and members of the community, the superego provides us with our moral sense and acts as the conscious and floods the ego with feelings of guilt and shame when we think or do something that society defines as wrong. So, the ego is stuck in between the id and the superego. Defense mechanisms are methods that the ego uses to avoid recognizing ideas or emotion that cause personal anxiety. And we're going to talk about the different defense mechanisms. Repression removes anxiety-causing ideas from conscious awareness by pushing them to the unconscious. Rationalization uses self-deception to justify unacceptable behaviors or ideas. Regression is when an individual is under a great deal of stress, he or she will return to behavior that is characteristic of an earlier stage of development. Projection is when people sometimes deal with unacceptable impulses by projecting those impulses outward onto other people. There's a few more defense mechanisms that we're going to talk about in class. But defense mechanisms, according to Freud, when used in moderation, they may be normal and even useful to protect people from painful feelings like anxiety, guilt, and shame. But they become unhealthy when they lead a person to ignore the underlying issues causing these feelings. Here are some more. You have displacement, reaction formation, denial, and sublimation. And you can read those for yourself. So Freud also believed that we develop through 5 stages. They can begin at birth and continue through adolescence. And we instinctively seek to preserve and extend life. So you have the oral stage, which begins in the first year. Infants are continually exploring their world by picking up objects and putting them in their mouth. And he said that infant survival is dependent on the attentions of adults, and a child whose caretakers do not meet his or her needs during this stage may become fixated at the oral stage. The anal stage, occurs between 1.5 years old and 2.5, and during this stage, children learn that they can control their bodily functions. And conflict during the anal stage can lead to two sets of adult personality traits, what he called anal retentive and anal expulsive. The phallic stage begins in the 3rd year of life, and this is when they start to discover the physical differences between the two sexes and become focused on their own bodies a lot more. And they also may develop strong attachments to the parent of the opposite sex. Latency stage, this is around ages 5 or 6. Freud believed that children would have been in conflict with their parents for several years, and at this point they would retreat from the conflict and repress all aggressive urges. And then you have the genital stage, and that we reach this in puberty, and the adolescent does not generally encounter any new psychological conflicts during this period, but does become more aware of his or her gender identity. Again, these stages have been largely debunked by modern psychologists. These were just Freud's idea, and we talk about him because he was the first person to ever really explore personality and what makes us who we are.